I Hate the News is the weekly news bulletin from I Hate Politics podcast, a show about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. It's September 23rd, 2025. The 7-state Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement, intended to save the bay, is supposed to re-up their compact this year. But advocates say it is weak sauce. In Washington, D.C., the 30-day federal takeover of the city police has lapsed, but 14 congressional bills still pose threats to home rule. Also in Washington, but perhaps coming soon to a school district near you, the plight of H1-B school teachers who were recruited to come teach in public schools with promises of green card sponsorship. With Trump's new $100,000 H1-B visa fee, and the promise of a green card receding, what now? At the University of Maryland in College Park, a body lice outbreak. In the university library, of all places. And more. Stay with us.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by the Political Science Program at UMBC Shady Grove, where you'll learn a strong foundation in public policy, pre-law, and international affairs for an impactful career in a number of essential areas. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
What's with you today? What's with today? Gotta tell her I love her.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning, precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Dear Daria, a Washington, D.C. power pop indie rock band. Mary Jo Mattea on vocals, guitar, and keys. Joshua Hunter on guitar. Eamon Donnelly on bass. And Dan ABH on drums. You can find their music at deardariaband.com.
Damn the man who saved the empire. Damn the man who saved the empire. Damn the man who saved the empire. Damn the man who saved the
The Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement is a compact between 7 states in the region: Maryland, Virginia, D.C., Delaware, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and New York. The original agreement, signed in the 1980s, has been re-upped a number of times, the last iteration in 2014. This year, the agreement is supposed to be renewed once again, but during the public comment period on the new agreement text, advocates have come in with criticism. Christine Condon, an environmental reporter for Maryland Matters, looked through the mountain of comments.
A lot of people were, I would say, a little disappointed with a lack of ambition in the new agreement. In 2014, one of the things that they promised to do was to have all the different pollution controls in place. The EPA back in the Obama administration set this diet, the total maximum daily load, or TMDL. To meet this diet, the Bay states have to commit to reduce the amount of damaging nutrients they're sending into the Bay. And those come from things like agricultural fertilizers and even like sewage treatment plants. In 2014, the Bay states said, we are going to meet that diet by 2025. Well, 2025 is here. And while some of the states a little further from the estuary, actually, I think DC met their commitment, West Virginia, which had a smaller commitment, but the states that had a large commitment to make fell short. Pennsylvania fell pretty short. Maryland just shy, actually. But as a group, the states failed to hit that mark. So I think commenters were kind of expecting, we really need to accelerate, we really need to hit these markers. And what the revised document that came out recently for public comment said was, okay, well, we're actually working on a new computer model because the Bay States use computer modeling to determine how many nutrients and pollutants they're sending into the Bay. We're working on that. In 5 years, we're going to come back to this. And I think a lot of folks, in environmental spaces were pretty turned off by that. The architects behind this at the Chesapeake Bay program told me they wanted to make some of those targets, whether it was for wetland acreage or submerged, aquatic vegetation, more realistic, because those fell so short last time that it was kind of like, last time it was pretty much all, we aspire to do X by 2025. This time it was, some of them are 2030, some of them are 2035. And I think, some folks, especially the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, which is a nonprofit, not to be confused with the Bay program, they were saying we really want a consistent goal to be able to kind of market around this and unify behind this. And so that was one of the other things that kept coming up in the comments too. A lot of other folks felt that way.
Do you have an understanding why the Chesapeake Bay program might be punting things, loosening standards?
The Bay program is dealing with the sobering reality of not being able to hit the 2025 goals. Some goals were hit, it's such a large agreement with so many different pieces, but others weren't. Last time they did the agreement, a lot has changed in our knowledge about climate change. A lot has changed in our knowledge about the watershed and how much population growth was going to affect the amount of pollution coming into the Bay. Even our knowledge about the Conowingo Dam, which sits in the Susquehanna River, which is the Bay's largest tributary, that for such a long time was actually trapping some of the nutrients flowing down the Susquehanna in Pennsylvania. Now that dam is effectively full and washes nutrients and sediment down into the watershed during rain events. And a lot of the initial progress came from outfitting sewage treatment plants. Government owns many of those plants and could simply outfit them. Finding the money wasn't easy, of course, but you could just kind of do it. Dealing with things like pollution from farm fields and city streets has not been quite so easy politically. You're talking about, major constituencies, whether it's local governments, whether it's farmers. And then there's the political moment in which we find ourselves, where Trump's back in the White House. And last time he tried to zero out the entire Bay program in his proposed budget. And now Trump hasn't targeted the Bay program. Actually, their budget was not proposed to be zeroed out again. It was kept level. But the Trump administration has whittled down a lot of the agencies that support the Bay restoration effort, USGS, EPA. Nobody will kind of come out and say it, but I think the states are reckoning with that, and the states are reckoning with their own political situations right now, their own budgets right now.
So what is interesting to me is that advocates are not able to recognize political constraints, or they do not recognize political constraints as meaningful limitations on the Bay work.
So I think they recognize that, but I think they also have another thing to play, which is like, the amount of money that has gone into this over the years, and the amount of money that goes to these nonprofits to try to improve the Bay is also a factor. You have philanthropy playing a large role here. I think they recognize the constraints, but want to keep pushing this to ensure that, the Bay and environmental issues don't fall behind and keep falling behind other political priorities. I think they want to ensure that the Bay remains top of mind. And I think they recognize that that's not quite happening right now.
Does the scientific advocacy community have any specific solutions for the diffuse pollutants? So from farmland or from streets, the pollutants are diffuse as opposed to sewage treatment plant pollution, where the pollution is point.
The Chesapeake Bay program has a scientific and technical advisory committee, and they produced a very insightful report that was also damning in a lot of ways. It said, what we're doing isn't working. And one of the things that they envision is instead of paying to plant a bunch of trees or paying to, make, changes to a stream bank or whatever it is, don't pay for the practice just to put it in there, but pay for the performance. So pay based on how much pollution reduction that you're achieving from a particular action.
Christine Condon, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
In Washington, D.C., President Trump's executive order taking over the city's police department has lapsed. But the city's leadership appeared in Congress last week to speak against bills still haunting home rule. Sam P.K. Collins is a reporter for the Washington Informer, the Chocolate City's only black-owned newspaper. I asked him about the legacy of Trump's 30-day takeover of the city's police force.
The legacy is still unfolding in the form of a congressional interference. We had 14 laws get approved by a House committee last week. A handful of those laws were approved in the House by Republicans, and in some cases, more than 24 Democrats. And these laws involved sentencing 14-year-olds as adults for violent crimes, giving the president control of a judicial commission that appoints judges. On the streets, there's still some gray area around ICE's cooperation with MPD. All of these events is to overlook the fact that for 50 years, DC has had this home rule that was shaky from the very start.
Is MPD, Metropolitan Police Department, changing anything about the way it is functioning as a consequence of the 30-day takeover? Or is it back to what it was before the takeover?
The mayoral order that was issued earlier this month allows, there's an office set up, an entity through which the DC government, and that includes MPD, can use resources at the federal government's beckoning.
Apart from the continued cooperation from MPD with ICE, are you seeing any other agencies able to come in and out of the neighborhoods?
The National Guard is cleaning up.
But the National Guard from other states are no longer there. Is that correct?
They're not supposed to be there. That's still unclear, though.
Where does all of this leave Mayor Bowser politically?
That's a great question. I mean, Mayor Bowser, her viewpoint varies among people. So there's a contingent that sees the bigger picture, so to speak, and they say they understand what she's doing. They don't, they understand DC's precarious status and how Mayor Bowser's trying to navigate that. That's their argument. You have another subsect who has for the longest time seen Mayor Bowser as pro-capital, pro-big people. She's not for the marginalized, and they see this current situation as an extension of that, of her just further showing who they always thought her to be, or who, according to them, she has shown herself to be. So, to answer your question more directly, without Robert White as a challenger, because Robert White, as has been reported, he's going for the congressional seat instead. Without him as a challenger, Mayor Bowser, some would say, is more likely to have a fourth term. And Robert White was the most credible candidate to go against her, because there is frustration with Mayor Bowser, but she always accumulates enough votes to go another term.
The DC government had something of a victory with the passage of the RFK Stadium bill. It was widely expected that it would pass, but was the council able to change anything in the deal that made it better?
DC Councilmember Robert White wanted to impose or see penalties imposed on the project if it wasn't completed by a certain time period, 2050 or so. And that didn't pass. There were a couple other amendments that were successful, though. DC Councilmember Charles Allen was pleased with the amendments dealing with transit, and the funding for transit. And he was also pleased with the environmental factors. Councilmember Trayon White of Ward 8 was able to secure some resources for local football players that the Commanders would provide. And he did that in collaboration with DC Councilmember Wendell Felder.
Now that, for the time being at least, the RFK Stadium deal is going off the political agenda and the 30-day federal takeover is over, What do you think the fall session is looking like for the DC Council and for the mayor?
October 7th, the DC Council will look at extending the juvenile curfew that was implemented this summer, actually, in response to the large youth gatherings that took place in the commercial districts in DC. We should look at what Councilmember Trayon White is going to do this fall as well. I know he is looking to get a committee assignment. DC Council Chairman Mendelson hasn't budged on that, but Tuesday's council legislative meeting, he put forth a few amendments dealing with utility assistance, dealing with youth sports, dealing with allowing a landlord and a delinquent tenant could mediate outside of court. You know, of course, that amendment did not pass for the Rental Act, but as people would see in the Collins Council report, Councilmember White of Ward 8, upon his return to the council, has tried to. I would also look at the bottle bill in the council's committee for transportation and the environment. The bottle bill being legislation that Councilmember Brand Doe put forth. It would allow a rebate of 10 cents per bottle that is recycled. And this is a program she says is meant to encourage cleaning in the district. And I only mention this bill because we're speaking to these efforts, so-called, to beautify the district. Now, as far as the mayor, for the rest of the year, there has been focus on DC education. So I see with the recent State of Education event that she had, and with the release of this new portal through which DC parents can look for after-school activities, I see the DC mayor focusing on youth.
Sam P.K. Collins, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Many school districts around the country, including DCPS and MCPS, have hired hundreds of foreign teachers since the pandemic in an effort to meet the national teacher shortage. These teachers were recruited with promises of green card sponsorship, which would follow 6 years of H1-B work. H1-B is a non-immigrant temporary work visa issued for skilled labor for 3 years at a time and can be re-upped for a second time. School districts around the country had hired these foreign teachers and promised them green card sponsorship after they completed their 6 years on the H1-B visa. DCPS and potentially other school districts are reconsidering all of this in light of the Trump administration's policy changes, the latest of which is Trump's plan to impose a $100,000 annual fee for every H-1B visa. The money is to come from employers, which raises the question, is there a school district in the entire country that can afford to do this? The president of Washington Teachers Union, Laura Fuchs, explains.
DC Public Schools, starting around 2018, began recruiting people on an H-1B visa, which is a temporary visa that can only be renewed one time, and it lasts 3 years for each time. And so it's 6 years maximum. When they began this program, it got quickly interrupted by the pandemic, but there were a few people who were hired during that time. And then when we came back from virtual learning, it started expanding rather quickly. When they were hiring, originally, they had a clear pathway to a green card. It was, when it began, probably enough slots for everyone who participated through the H-1B program to at least have the opportunity. But then quickly, even that was getting overshadowed by the number of slots because they were hiring so many people on H-1B, which to us indicates its clear success. In March 2025, in a Washington Post story, they admitted that they had discontinued what they were now calling a pilot, which they had never used that word before, and that they just discontinued the green card portion. They're continuing and have been continuing to recruit and hire on H-1B, including this school year after their cancellation of the green card component. And we view that as essentially a broken promise. There was no communication at all that they were even considering removing the pathway. And I think it's because they knew that this would, of course, completely cripple the H1-B program that they have been successfully using.
How many teachers are we talking about?
It's hard to say exactly. We believe around 300 at this point.
Technically, those teachers, if let go by DCPS, could find another school district that would employ them. Is that a possibility?
Depends on where they are in their H1B. No districts that are going to take somebody and put them on a green card who haven't worked for a few years at least in that district. And so if you're already on year 4 or year 5, and it already takes 2 years to go through the green card application process, and you at least need, like a good year and a half to get through the first step, and then you can extend your H1B once you've reached, that point in the green card application, they will extend it. So it's rational to look at your options if you're early on in H1B, but those who are already year 4 and 5, there's no way that they can find another district, get the process started for the green card, right? Prove themselves to that district, etc., in the time that it would take to get the green card and not have to return.
Is this only DCPS or charter schools as well?
To our knowledge, charters do not offer H1B program.
Is there a certain subject area where these teachers are focused, like math, science, or something?
Obviously, we have a lot of foreign language teachers, a lot of ELL educators, people who specialize in the language and bilingual programs, which DCPS has found to be very popular and is seeking to expand. But it isn't exclusively that. We have people who are special educators. We have people who have taught science and math. Schools have not been limited in what DCPS was allowing to be done on an H1B.
Are they still hiring in this program?
Yes, they are out of their minds.
Are there some wards in the district where international teachers are overrepresented?
Wards 1 and 4, perhaps not surprisingly, have the highest number. These are schools with high levels of ELL students as well. And of course, some of the bilingual programs, right, also track in those 2 wards in particular. But it's all 8 wards have international educators. Pretty much every school has at least one.
Laura Fuchs, thank you for taking the time to explain the problem.
No problem. Thank you.
Worth noting that my conversation with Laura Fuchs was recorded prior to Trump's announcement of the $100,000 H-1B fee, but this only makes the problem worse. Fall 2025 somehow birthed an unexpected debate on lice. First, CDC issued new guidelines for schools saying that students with head lice should not be kept at home, and schools should not report out lice outbreaks to the community. How thoroughly have we rejected COVID-era stay-at-home mandates? And now last week, the University of Maryland campus in the Washington, D.C. suburbs of College Park reported a body lice outbreak. Lauren Salzberg, who goes by the moniker Potomac Lice Lady, tries to make sense of it all.
There are 3 types of lice. You have head lice, you have body lice, and then there is pubic lice. And each are host specific, meaning they don't travel from one to the other. They're all a little different in their size and shape and how they look, and they're each transmitted differently. Head lice are transmitted from head-to-head contact. Body lice are transmitted from person to person, but can also be transmitted from articles of clothing and things that you share. With pubic lice, it's sexually transmitted, and it's treated very differently than the other 2. With head lice also, the eggs, or what's also known as nits, they are laid on the hair shaft directly. And those eggs will never come off the hair shaft because they're laid with a very specific glue. And that glue is so strong that when you have to remove those eggs, they're so tightly glued on that you either have to pull them off the individual hair strand with a very special lice comb. Body lice, the eggs can be laid on articles of clothing. That presents a whole other problem because then, therefore, the spread can be greater if the eggs are now on the clothing and then they hatch. Therefore, the spread can be greater. We haven't really heard much of body lice like you hear of head lice. I mean, head lice has right now a big problem, and there's much of an epidemic of it amongst schools. There are great outbreaks. You hear of it, a lot in the elementary schools, high schools, etc. Personally, I have not really heard much about body lice. We did hear of it, a lot during wartime amongst soldiers fighting who, when they were in their camps, in their barracks, when you have a lot of people in close quarters. You heard a lot of it back in times of like the concentration camps. You had many, many people in very, very tight quarters, and you had people sharing lots of clothing and blankets. You often hear about body lice in a lot of homeless shelters, because you've got sometimes just people sharing things and not being very in cleanly, conditions. And you've got a lot of just shared articles of clothing and a lot of shared objects.
What are the medical consequences you see from body lice?
Lice in general don't really pose any medical threat. They are a human parasite. They need a host to survive. They aren't shown to really carry disease. However, they bite. So people can experience itchiness, rashes, perhaps, swollen lymph nodes. People might notice bite marks on themselves. Most people hear the word lice and they hear like the ick factor. They associate it with dirtiness, and they don't really understand what really lice is. And unfortunately, with lice, it just, because it's so contagious, because you get it from people, once you get it, there's just a lot of cumbersome work that has to be done to get rid of it. That's probably the most gruesome task.
With body lice, what is that work?
High heat is the most effective way to get rid of the lice and their eggs. So with all of the bedding, the sheets, clothing, all of that needs to be washed in very, very hot water and has to be dried on very high heat temperatures. Vacuum all of the affected areas to make sure that the eggs are removed from carpeting and furniture and such. All of the hair brushes and things like that. The hair would have to be taken out of the brushes. They would have to be sanitized.
So this is happening in a college campus. I expect that this is in some dorms. Is the solution then to get rid of mattresses and all of that?
I read that it was in a library. It was maybe contained to one or two buildings. My question is, how did it get there in the first place? I'm trying to myself understand how it gets into a library. It had to have been brought in by an affected individual. When you're dealing with a university of that size, that's probably very hard for them to do, to try to figure out where it came from. They claim that they have resolved the issue. Hopefully they did.
Lauren Salzberg, Potomac Lice Lady, thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
Stella's a strange and special girl, oblivious in her own world, a ray of sunshine each new day. She likes to hang around the house, sleep through the whole day on the couch, doesn't do much and that's okay.
That's all for this episode. Be sure to check out our feature interview series that come out Friday mornings. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities at Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from Dear Daria, a Washington, D.C. power pop indie rock band. Mary Jo Mattea on vocals, guitar, and keys. Joshua Hunter on guitar. Eamon Donnelly on bass. And Dan ABH on drums. You can find their music at deardariaband.com. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihppod.org. I hope you'll subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.
Extraordinary.